Greetings to all those joining us in South Africa and internationally for the 7th seminar in our 10-part series on climate change. I'm Professor David Vilchitz, Director of the South African Institute for Advanced Constitutional, Public, Human Rights and International Law, a center in the Faculty of Law of the University of Johannesburg, and we are delighted to be the hosts of the series. This series was created to bring together leading experts who would explore various aspects of climate change from the perspective of multiple disciplines. Through the carefully designed topics, we delve into science, law, policy, and social justice, and will expose participants to the key debates that occur in these areas. I want to pay tribute to the multidisciplinary organizing team for their vision and leadership. They are Professor Kitty Dumont, Professor in the Department of Psychology, University of South Africa, Dr. Jenny Hall, Department of Procedural Law, University of Johannesburg, Professor Diane Hildebrand, Director of the Institute for the Development of Energy for African Sustainability, IDEAS, at the University of South Africa, Professor Lwazi Ngubavana, Director of the African Energy Leadership Center at the Wits Business School, and Professor Colleen Fogel, Distinguished Professor at the Global Change Institute at the University of the Witwatersrand. I also want to thank our partner, Constitution Hill, for their support and all those who have helped advertise the series. From the SciFac side, I'd like to thank Naomi Ho for her work on the administrative side and Ibrahim Karim for designing our posters. Tonight, we have only 100 places in the Zoom conversation, but we are also live streaming on Facebook, and we welcome our viewers on Facebook. We are delighted to have with us two outstanding speakers today, Dr. Vishwas Satgar and Dorah Marema, who will address the topic, We the People, Climate Change and Civil Society Responses, and we look forward to a lively engagement. Our next seminar will be this time in 2 weeks only, so please remember that, on the 2nd of September at the same time, 5:30 to 7 South African time, and address the topic, Jobs or the Environment? How can climate change responses address the interests of labor? And we also have two illustrious speakers for the seminar, Dr. Roland and Quine Gam and Kent Jensen. More details on this seminar will be provided in the advertising prior to the seminar, and I will also post the RSVP in the chat. I will now hand over to the chair of the seminar, Professor Colleen Fogel. Professor Fogel is the acting director of the Global Change Institute at Wits University. As I mentioned, she is distinguished professor at the Global Change Institute, and she is a climate scientist by training, working in the policy practice space across a number of levels, including the national, local, and international. So over to you, Colleen.
Thank you, and thank you everyone, and a warm late afternoon, good evening, I guess. It really is a privilege for me to be here tonight and to be with my colleagues Dorah and Vishwas. The timing of this, I think, couldn't have been better. We've just recently had the first working group report from the IPCC on the biophysical implications of what would happen with climate change, and the report is really now coming out consistently and very strongly that we are in a code red for humanity. That is how the United Nations has actually called it. The Earth is warming faster than previously thought. Scientists are pointing to a closing window to avoid catastrophic outcomes. Precipitation events will intensify in most regions with warming, so the messages have been coming out consistently, but this time a lot more evidence for tipping points that if we don't address those, they could become runaway and locked in for future generations, and you can't get those back. A proportion of intense tropical cyclones with huge wind speeds projected also to increase, and we saw what happened with Idai in Mozambique, one of the most serious that we've had in recent years, and in fact in our history. And our region in Southern Africa and our country, South Africa, is actually referred to as a hotspot, because we will be going through not only heat waves, droughts, agricultural and ecological, but also huge other pressures that will be placed on society. So what to do and who to engage? We've heard on this series that we've been running from very distinguished people. We've heard from Joanna Yarwich, we've heard from business people, we've heard from Bobby Peake, we've heard from government, we've heard from Francois Engelbrecht, a top scientist who's been working on the IPCC. But tonight it is my privilege to draw attention now to what is really to be done and who really is going to be impacted, apart from only policy, but actually the practice community and larger civic society. When we presented the findings of the IPCC recently to a large community last week, many of the people asked, what can we do about this? And what is making it worse? So tonight it gives me a great honor and a privilege to introduce our first speaker. They'll each speak for between 15 to 20 minutes. Then we'll have a few interactions with both of them, and then we'll turn across to you all in the audience who may wish to pose your questions. So Dorah has been involved in issues of sustainability since 2000. She's worked with a wide range of stakeholders in various sectors, including small-scale agriculture, environment, climate, renewable energy, gender and land rights at local, national and international levels. She founded Gender CC, Southern Africa Women for Climate Justice in 2008, and co-founded the Green Business College in 2017, a social enterprise based in Johannesburg, dedicated to building green entrepreneurs by uniting green skills with business know-how. Dorah is currently the portfolio head municipal sustainability person at the South African Local Government Association in Selga. So she's really moved across spaces and in across influential positions. So I hand over to you, Dorah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colleen, and thank you for all the organizers and for all the speakers that came before us. For me, it is a great honor. It is a great privilege to be part of this conversation tonight. I come here, having mulling around, what are some of the issues that I will raise tonight. I believe I bring a perspective that is two-sided. I have worked for many years, I think over 15 years in the climate change sector, generally in the environment for over 20 years. And I have worked in the, with grassroots communities, and I've seen how climate change manifests itself within communities. And I think I have also seen how the negotiations and the talks and the various meetings that we have sometimes are very much devoid from the very reality of how climate change manifests itself and how people in communities and vulnerable communities are experiencing this. And I think it's important to highlight that for us to be able to start moving and implementing real climate action, we need to be thinking about the very people that we always put in numbers. Climate change is going to affect the poor. Climate change is going to affect many people in the global south. Who are those? Because I think behind these labels, there are real human beings. And I think it's important that we need to figure out how are we going to be able to work with, to work in the true sense of the word, in the grassroots communities to be able to effect real change. I have a privilege of joining local government as I've been introduced, and I will be a year on the 1st of September. And I think having moved to that side of things, I've also actually have realized that the struggle very much is the same. Where you've got the national government, you've got provincial government, you also have got local government. And I think when we have conversations, we're talking about the nationally determined contributions. We're talking about South Africa moving to a net zero. But how will that be dissected? Into locally determined actions. What are those? How will that sphere of government, which is the local government, be able to grasp this? So I've been thinking a lot about what role this sphere of government play in accelerating transformative climate change action. From the droughts to the clouds to the swarms of locusts and worms, and local municipalities in South Africa and across the continent are at the front line of climate change response. They are the closest form of government to the people. And I believe that they have a clear grasp of the most important and urgent community climate change adaptation needs. And they are also mandated to ensure that there is service delivery. So this means that they have a key role to play in implementing transformative local climate action to deal with the impacts of climate change. But the situation it's really looking rather bleak. We have a concentration of support to the metropolitan municipalities, and I can dare say the top 5 maybe. And with the majority of the intermediate cities and the local municipalities really struggling. And then the question that I ask is, why are the majority of local municipalities often unable to deliver effective local climate change interventions to their local communities? And you know, with the very limited knowledge that I have and experience I have in local government, I can cite a few reasons, and that may sound a bit familiar. For example, lack of technical capacity, lack of access to climate finance, no budget allocations made by municipalities, because often the issues of environment are not being prioritized, are not being seen as being issues that are urgent. So in the light of these challenges, there is an absence of in-depth research also to investigate what is needed to effectively overcome the barriers and to enable them to, municipalities to step up and provide local leadership on climate action. So we need to understand that a climate resilient local municipality depends fundamentally on the efficacy of various investment streams that needs to join up together. So for example, in South Africa, there has been a concerted effort to support municipalities, particularly cities, to develop climate change strategies and resilient plans. However, they are rarely integrated into municipal plans, programs, and budgets. We have recently been reviewing the district development plans, the so-called one plans. And we have been surprised at SALGA to see that even some of the municipalities that are really well advanced in the issues of climate change, that this one plan doesn't really reflect how that district is going to address the issues of climate change. We still see development happening, business as usual. We still see infrastructure investments going forward without climate change responsiveness. And I don't think we can afford to do this. We cannot afford to continue to have business as usual, where plans and infrastructure plans and investments in municipalities and their programs and budgets remain as standalone initiatives which impedes their effectiveness and sustainability. You also have a situation where some of these pockets of climate change initiatives in municipalities really just remain a bit of a white elephant on the sidelines, and not being mainstream properly within the institutions of the municipality. So there are key ingredients that are necessary for a municipality to be successful in implementing a climate action. And these include attaching value on the natural environment, the presence of political environmental champions within the municipality itself, and dedicated climate change adaptation budget allocations, and also a very good knowledge base, including connections through networks to relevant expertise that exist, that can be brought in. So underlying all of these key ingredients is also the critical issue of good governance, which is one of the most critical factors that has the potential to hamper or enable climate change action. So often, this is my view, often donors and other potential partners are deterred from working with local municipalities to implement climate action projects and intervention due to lack of good governance, technical capacity, and others. So I believe this should not really be an excuse for leaving this sphere of government closest to the people that are badly affected by the impacts of climate change, even as we speak, and really leaving it unable to contribute effectively to confronting climate change. I believe that instead there is a need for us to recognize that local climate action and good governance are intrinsically connected. And thus, they can be mutually reinforcing as well. So offering support for transformative local climate action within local government will have positive impacts beyond the climate change itself. And if ignored, the opposite will also be true. So performance-based climate change grants could possibly be pursued as a catalyst for mainstreaming climate change adaptation and mitigation within municipal planning and budgeting processes, thereby strengthening governance and playing a transformative role in building climate resilience in local government. So, this could be enabled through partnerships, public-private partnerships also, but also partnerships with various actors like, bringing in international organizations, bringing in the national departments, who could bring in various innovations and share good practice. So, I also noted that, I think, I read in a report, in an IED report, that less than 10% of climate finance goes to local communities, and most local communities that are mostly directly affected by climate change. And I think one way to address this would be to increase the amount of climate finance going to local government. And this will be key in ensuring that the funds arrive on time for communities that face devastating climate effects. Colleen was talking about the cyclone Adai that happened in the beginning of this year. And I'm telling you now that in meetings with a number of local municipalities who do not even have climate action plans, not even disaster management plans, it took really an arm and a leg for help to arrive. Day in, day out, we'll sit in meetings to look at how a state of disaster could be declared so that they could be able to access funds. And those funds need to be requested from the districts. And if the districts have run out of funds, the funds have to be requested from province, and province has to request the funds from national. And by the time those funds arrive, unfortunately, it would be maybe a number of months, and people would have to continued to live with all of those negative impacts. So I believe that local government has a critical role to play in creating climate resilient communities. However, this will only happen when they are fully empowered and supported through various means, including climate finance, technical support. Local municipalities need to be supported. As I indicated, that usually the support goes to the most capacitated metropolitan municipalities. So local municipalities are always left behind. They do not have dedicated staff. You have someone dealing with a whole host of issues, including environment, including climate change, and they really do not have the capacity to be able to even pay attention to making sure that there are plans and strategies in place and that those are also budgeted for. So, we need to be able to develop transformational projects, and that needs support. And we cannot keep on excluding this sphere of government in climate action efforts with the excuse that local municipalities do not have adequate capacity to implement and to manage their own climate change interventions and funds. So now is the time for all stakeholders and partners to partner with local governments to ensure that they have capacity, planning, and accountability mechanisms to be able to manage and deliver transformative local climate action. Thank you.
Dorah, and for a wonderful presentation. And if I could just remind people before we continue that there is a chat function, so you can all write your questions so that we can then bring those up as we go along. I'd like to now introduce Vishwas. I hope he's still there. I can't see him on the video. Vish, are you still there?
I am.
Oh, great. Okay.
But I'm unable to
use the video. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, no problem. So the next, okay, do you need the host to try and enable you? Is that the concern?
If that's possible, yeah.
Okay, thanks. David, I wondered if we could try and enable Vishwas to use his video.
Yeah, that's done. Thank you, Colleen.
Thank you. So Vish, you should be able to.
Thanks.
There we go. Righty. Thank you. Thank you. Right. So it's a great pleasure to introduce a comrade, I think, I can use those words, is an associate professor of international relations at the University of the Witwatersrand. He's the principal investigator for emancipatory future studies in the Anthropocene, and he's an editor of the Democratic Marxism series. He's very prolific as a writer. I don't know where he gets his energy from. He's a veteran activist, and more recently is the co-founder of the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign and the Climate Justice Charter, which he'll be telling us about and sharing with us. So a major person really committed to creating agencies for change. Thanks, Vish.
Thank you, Colleen and colleagues, for having us on this platform. It's also an honor to be here with Dorah. Dorah and I are comrades and allies and friends. We've crossed paths in the front lines over many, many years. The Greenhouse Project, the Eco-City Project, the cooperative space, the Climate Justice Charter space. So it's really an honor to be here with her today. I want to just situate my contribution around the Climate Justice Charter in a bit of a historical background and to kind of grapple with some important foreground questions. So the climate problem is an extremely dangerous problem. And yet we are sitting in this bizarre place where catastrophe is looming. We are at the 11th hour, and it's not as though urgency has really gripped every institution, every power structure, every player on the planet and in every society. And to understand why this problem has not been addressed for a long time, given that we've had good climate science actually for a very long time, is something we need to reflect on. So Shell, for example, knew about the climate problem in around the 50s and 60s. In 1979, a report was given to President Carter, drawing attention to the best climate science of the time, the work that was done in Hawaii, Mauna Loa, etc., and basically flagging this as a very serious problem for humanity. He asked the US Academy of Sciences to further look into this issue. By 1983, they surfaced their study. And of course, Reagan ensured that that study and that report was muted. But from 1988, since the IPCC was formed till 2018, for 3 decades, there's been no serious movement on this problem, this dangerous problem, this existential problem. And I think we must reflect on this tonight as well. So I want to prefer a response or try and answer this question. And I want to suggest that we lost 3 decades, firstly, because of the power of carbon corporations. And they have very, very effectively, over decades, ensured that the multilateral negotiations didn't have the efficacy that it needed. So for example, in the US context, they formed a coalition, and they were very, very effective on the Washington Beltway, and were able to kind of ensure that policy didn't come to the fore that threatened their interests. They also ensured that discourses around false solutions pervaded public discourse. We've also had the power of the US state. The US is the dominant state on planet Earth. And of course, every US president up to Obama were not willing to seriously lock in the United States into deep transformation around this problem. I mean, US presidents on record as saying the American way of life is not negotiable when it comes to climate. So you've had, if you like, a pariah state, and that pariah state being the most powerful state in the world. At the same time, the UN process itself has had flaws. Methodologically, and I share this sometimes with my GCI colleagues, Colleen and others, they did not foreground the global political economy around this problem. For example, they didn't have the oil corporations, the transport corporations, the cement corporations, etc., at the heart of the negotiations. It was nation states, and nation states were meant to deal with this problem. And yet it's largely the G20 countries. So you actually had a UN process that really wasn't locking in the key players to solve this problem. And then, of course, there's China. And China, which has really taken off after Mao Zedong in the 80s and so on, and its industrialization ambitions, has also not been willing to really compromise its ambitious modernization program and has contributed significantly now. Its per capita emissions are on par with Europe. So that's one set of reasons or explanations for why we are sitting in this 11th hour moment. But why has the emergency suddenly sort of come to the fore and is suddenly becoming mainstream, is suddenly becoming a question that all societies should be seized with? And I think it's something, again, we've got to grapple with. I would argue that what's important is since 2015, and we overshot the 1 degree Celsius threshold since pre-industrial revolution, as Dorah has been saying, climate is now lived reality in the lives of ordinary people. We've been through the worst drought in the history of South Africa, a 7-year drought, and I'm not sure if it's over, and I'm glad Francois and Colleen are here, they can tell us whether it's over or not. But it's been a long drought. We've had cyclonic impacts in the region that have been devastating, etc. It's lived reality in the context of wildfires, in the context of heat waves, etc., etc. So it cannot be ignored. But I think the other important thing informing urgency is the shift in the science. In 2018, the UN 1.5 degrees Celsius report really raised the alarm bell very, very loud. And it basically told us we've got the decade, this current decade, to cut emissions by 50% by 2030. A very, very ambitious, important call that was made, but suddenly got everyone to sit up, got policymakers to kind of open their eyes and ears. It got civil society forces to also up their game. But there's been another very important condition feeding into all of this, and it's got to do with the cycles of resistance from below. And climate justice politics, which I'll say a little bit more about later, is very, very important. And it's something that emerged in the ferment from below in parallel to the COP summits. It comes out of and grows out of environmental justice politics, which Dorah and I have been involved with for many, many years. And it's really a politics that went through 2 major cycles. By 2009, it was at the apex of the first cycle. And the Cochabamba summit of 2010, largely convened by indigenous movements in the Latin American context, signaled very strongly that the UN multilateral process was failing us. And this was in 2010. There was only one climate justice state in the entire multilateral system, and that was Bolivia. The second cycle of resistance begins with young people in Germany, in Ende Gelände, going to open coal pits and attempting to gridlock the extraction of coal. It goes further to Standing Rock in the United States, where indigenous people in 2016 said no to a pipeline that will devastate the indigenous land and water resources. And it goes further with Extinction Rebellion, and it goes further with Greta Thunberg and so on. But they all come to this in the second cycle of resistance, in which climate justice is a rallying call. System change, not climate change. Now, the Climate Justice Charter grew in that context, and actually it's part of that second cycle of resistance. In 2014, we had a national dialogue across the country with food justice activists, agrarian sector organizations, solidarity economy activists, trade unionists, and recognized that the food system was broken. The food system wasn't feeding millions of people, but at the same time, it was a food system that was implicated in the climate crisis, and we needed an alternative. And in 2015, we launched the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign. And this was in the second year of our drought. And as we campaigned and as we marched through society with the Hunger Tribunal in 2015, with the Human Rights Commission, a bread march in 2016, because bread prices were beginning to pinch and hit hard. As we had food sovereignty festivals to develop resources to build food sovereignty pathways and an imaginary, etc., we realized we had to connect things up. We had to connect high food prices, the suffering of the people, to the drought, and ultimately to climate. And it's in that context that we began to conceive and think very, very seriously, holistically, and in broad terms about the Climate Justice Charter. And how do we translate climate justice in a South African context? We saw our food system collapse. We saw the maize crop collapse. We saw livestock collapse. And so in 2018, we took a People's Food Sovereignty Act to Parliament, coming out of our deep bottom-up processes. And the idea of this Food Sovereignty Act was about a different vision for the food system, to give control of the food system to communities and small-scale farmers, and to ensure that we can feed our communities, villages, towns, and cities. But of course, we ignored. At the same time, when the UN put out its report, we got over 60 organizations in the country to urgently endorse a call to the South African president and the South African parliament that an urgent convening happen of parliament, so that there's deep reflection on the climate science and what this means for South Africa's climate policy and positioning. And of course, we were ignored even then. So despite all of that, we continued with the climate justice charter process. We had a host of constituency dialogues in 2019 from faith-based communities, labor, social justice, and most importantly, youth and children. And the charter basically was shaped by those dialogues, the alternatives that people have been fighting for at the front lines of a host of struggles. Waste pickers wanting zero jobs, wanting zero waste, trade unions wanting climate jobs, young people thinking in terms of decarbonization, socially owned renewable energy, etc. And in the end, we developed this charter. It went into various iterations. There were inputs from progressive activists and intellectuals. There were conferences. There were online platforms. And eventually, we handed it over to Parliament last year on October 16th. Together with a science document prepared by our colleagues at GCI, which basically says that Southern Africa is heating at twice the global average, together with the memorandum of demands from communities. And so that's where we took the charter, and we wanted the parliament and the parliamentarians and the political leadership of the society to take this issue seriously and to affirm the charter as per section 234 of the Constitution. Up to now, we haven't heard from them. My two final points are just around, what is climate justice? And basically, the way we understand it in the Climate Justice Charter, it's a plurivision. It's about bringing together different conceptions of the deep just transition and the kind of deeper intellectual underpinnings of that, from deep ecology on one side to kind of transformative modernization as well. It holds a very sharp tension in it. At the same time, it is about ensuring that we deal with the historical legacies of oppression in South Africa, including oppressions related to racism, patriarchy and gender oppression, and other forms of social exclusion. So in that sense, it's saying the most vulnerable must be front and center. And this relates to emancipatory ecology, which is also central to this charter. And that is, we must challenge the ecologies of capital. I mean, Oxfam did a study around who has the largest carbon footprints on planet Earth. And actually, it's the wealthy, including in South Africa. And so emancipatory ecology is really about the ecology of those that are bearing the brunt of all of the suffering. And so finally, where do we go from here? So for us, because this is such a big societal challenge and so on, there's various imperatives. The first big imperative now is to ensure institutions in society adopt and embrace the charter. It's heartening to know today with colleagues, there was an article in the Daily Maverick calling on WITS to divest and to become a climate justice leader. And on this platform tonight, I'd like UJ and other universities to also join this call for divestment, but also for the adoption of the charter. Universities and institutions like this are very, very crucial for the deep just transition. The second important imperative for us is to ensure that we have what we call momentum for deep just transitions in workplaces and communities. And we're working on a deep just transition tool for this. Workers need to understand what decarbonization is all about. So do communities. They need to understand what adaptive systems are all about, and so on. The third important imperative for us is what we are calling a climate justice deal for South Africa. We don't use the language of a Green New Deal. We use the language of a climate justice deal for all the philosophical and political reasons I've explained. And a climate justice deal for us is really about ensuring that at a macro level, we make all the right decisions. As Dorah mentioned, I mean, local governments are struggling. South Africa, by the way, it does not invest in infrastructure, and it's not investing in climate infrastructure. And so the climate justice deal for us is about really tackling the deep systemic issues that we need to confront. And finally, we need to build a mass-driven movement. And I invite you all today to also join us to build the Climate Justice Charter movement. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Vish, very, very much. And really for quite sobering realities around that it's not climate that is really the change that we're needing. It's actually the systems change. So I wondered if, Dorah, if you could also just switch on your video, and if I could just ask for some questions that I will pose, and then we'll open it up. We've got quite a bit of time. So please, those of you who are in the audience, now's your time to post your questions. And I do think, David, there might be questions coming from the other sources. Is that correct, David?
Colleen, we will post those for you in the chat if they come up.
If they come up. All right. Thank you very, very much. So, Dorah, I wondered if you could perhaps just give us a little bit more detail about the role of the IDP and policy, and whether that's effective in pulling out some of the climate issues that you see, because that seems to be the mouthpiece, if you like, for local communities to actually have an interface with government. And is that effective or not? And what could be done in that space? So if you could perhaps comment on that. Thanks, Dorah.
No, thank you so much. Yeah, definitely the IDP process is a process that had been set out to be able to really get, to get the communities and the citizens to be able to articulate their needs. And also to make sure that all of those are then programmatized and are also budgeted for and then implemented. But also it doesn't end there. Also to make sure that there is monitoring by communities to make sure that municipalities are delivering on the promises that they have made. I don't think, things have been smooth, things have been working. And I think particularly on the issues of environment, including climate change. Like I indicated in my initial remarks, that there is a severe shortage of capacity. And as a result, a severe shortage of technical expertise, but also an appreciation of the environmental function within local municipalities. And I think, environmental issues, get to compete with a whole host of other issues within municipalities. And I think it's also maybe I'm just thinking in terms of these issues lending themselves into the IDPs. Do we have communities that are also very clear in terms of what is it that they should be asking and they should be demanding? I think it's really kind of looking like it's both ways. So right now, the focus is really to make sure that, yes, the policies, the environmental policies that are there are implemented, but also the environmental function is a cross-cutting function, right? It needs to be embedded in all departments. And there are some other departments that are not integrating the issues of environment or the issues of climate change, for example, and hence my input around the one development plans not reflecting the issue of climate change, even in metros that are really in the lead as far as these issues are concerned. For me, this was an aha moment. It actually shows that environmental issues are not being institutionalized. They remain somewhere, in the corner, and they are not being integrated. So I think that is a challenge that we have, and I think that there has to be a shift. There has to be a change, in the sense that the work needs to start focusing in the inside first to make sure that whatever development that is being delivered, that it is climate change responsive. That whatever infrastructure, a school, a road, a clinic that is being built, it doesn't go and get built without during the planning and the design, the consideration around around climate change responsiveness. And I think the issue of policy, there are great policies. There are climate change action plans, but are they being implemented? Because I think the first thing is they need to be budgeted for first, and we're seeing that. The fiscal environment is not yet, it's not yet really taking into consideration the issues of climate change, let alone the broader environmental management issues.
Thanks very much, Dorah. And there are quite a few questions for you, but I want to just pose one to Vish. Vish, you know, again, in the light of the notion of a broader systems change, you've mentioned that the climate justice movement, and even with the divestment discussions and debates that are going on, you spoke about socially owned renewables and energy. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Does it involve, I think Mark Swilling talks about cooperatives of, you know, social groups. How does that work? I mean, presumably renewable prices for energy are coming down, so it is affordable, but these things, you know, how does that all kind of work to actually enable that kind of socially owned renewable energy source? Thanks, Vish.
Great. So the one place I want to start with is some international sort of comparisons, and ironically with cooperatives in the interwar years in the United States. The rural electrification program of the United States in the interwar years in the 20th century was driven by cooperatives. And that's an example of carbon-based, socially owned renewable energy, okay? But in the context of the second half of the 20th century, there are various examples of socially owned forms, Germany being one of them, where the energy revolution, as it's called, from the 70s onwards, were based in localized village-based communities, pooling their resources and you know, buying wind turbines and building kind of collective energy pools, renewable energy pools, and so on. In places like rural Italy, and I've visited some of these little villages in the north of Italy, there are strong cooperative traditions in Italy, going back to the 19th century. And in the villages I visited, each village had a cooperative bank. They had a community supermarket, but they also had the church. But in addition to that, they were able to pool their collective power in their cooperative bank to kind of work with the government's, local government's subsidization program for renewable energy rollout. And in that way, they were shaping the modalities and dynamics and the extent to which communities owned and could determine what form the energy rollout took. So that's some of the international examples. There's other countries as well. There's quite a few Scandinavian countries that have also gone down this path. In the South African context, what's very important about this question is that the National Union of Metal Workers in South Africa has been, well, was ahead of the curve, and basically had two very important conferences. And both these conferences were research-based. They were in dialogue with international experts. They were about learning through study tours, etc. And they came to the conclusion that it was important for us to start transitioning the manufacturing base of South Africa, and that the crucial concept guiding this should be socially owned renewable energy, which means that you have these multiple forms. You have this ecology of forms, whether it's communal associations, whether it's civic organizations in communities, whether it's trusts, whether it's cooperatives, etc., whether it's municipal corporations, all of them playing their part in kind of decentralizing the grid and building this new renewable energy system. And I think the emphasis on system is very important in how we think about socially owned renewables as well. And this is where I think the whole question of where Eskom fits in is very challenging and controversial. I won't go into that, but just to say this is where the concept comes from. And at the grassroots right now, there are various interesting initiatives bubbling up in communities around this, but they need resourcing.
Right, that's always the critical thing, right? Yeah, thanks, good. Okay, I'm now going to turn to the chat and then see how far we go. There are quite a number of questions and I'll try and divvy them up so that we get one to each of you. So Jenny Hall says, thank you, Dorah, for a great talk. Can you talk a little more as to how you see the difference in responsibilities between district and local municipalities and the challenges? And is think global, act local still a valid idea?
No, thank you so much, Jenny, for that question. So the district municipalities, they have a broader responsibility, including things like integrated planning, bulk supply of water, of electricity, public transport, and things like that. And the local municipality really do everything that a municipality is mandated to perform. And districts have, they have a number of local municipalities under them, and there are certain functions that are sitting. For example, as I said, disaster management is actually one of those, sitting at the district and the local. Really, many times locals depend on the support of the district. So in terms of the second part of your question, are you asking what are the challenges?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so the challenges is that you will find, in some instances, you'll find districts that are weaker than the locals, yeah? So you'll find a local municipality, for example, Polokwane, it's a bigger town, and yeah, it's much more capacitated than the district. And I think what we need is to be able to look at, some of these functions that are mandated to be sitting at a district. Can they be moved to some of the locals that are part of the district that are a bit more stronger and a bit more capacitated? Can we have a differentiation of allocating some of these functions, for example, right? So that is really the challenge. It's not it can't be one size fits all, and I think SALGA is trying to pursue a discussion with COCTA and others to be able to look at this when it comes to some of the functions that are really critical, and in areas where you've got locals that are much more stronger, much more robust, and much more capacitated than their districts, and whether the concept of ACT what is it? What is ACT local and
ACT local? I think global, ACT local.
Yeah, I think global, ACT local. I don't know. I don't know, because I think you should think local. You should think
local, and I think, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so you should think local in terms of
influence global.
Yeah, influence global. I would say that. So think local and influence global. Global must follow local, definitely, for sure. Yeah, that's my perspective.
Okay, thanks. Then there's a question for Vish from David. Thanks, Vish, for your talk, but I have a fundamental challenge. You mentioned livestock, which is part of the problem, treating other creatures as instruments for human ends. Why do you not include animals in the oppressive systems that humans have created? Will the Climate Justice Charter call for moving to plant-based eating and away from meat, which is the highest contributor to climate change? Your call is for divestment from fossil fuels, but what about animal agriculture and providing attractive plant-based alternatives on campuses, for example?
Great question. So I was just making an observation about what was happening in the sort of industrial agro-food economy during our drought. So I'm not an avid supporter of that system. But let me develop this further. So I think in the context of the Climate Justice Charter, there is, as I said, a tension in it. And there's definitely a deep ecological view in it, which is about the rights of all living and sentient forms, okay? And there is even one of the, an articulation around the rights of nature, which is not the same as human rights. It's a very different paradigm about thinking about ecosystems and the interconnections and the different life forms that inhabit ecosystems. And that's in the charter. But at the same time, there's a modest anthropocentrism also in the charter, where people, where the position is that we are a important species. At the same time, we have a lot of power, and we need to be able to use that power responsibly and ethically. And that runs through the charter. Now, in that context, the charter, when it's starting to think about the food question and food systems, is really about food sovereignty. And this is very, very important. Now, food sovereignty is championed by the largest planetary movement we have, La Via Campesina, with over 200 million members. It's a discourse that emerged as an alternative to food security. And it's really about re-embedding food systems to break with this globalized, mono-industrial, fast food, planetary food system. And it's also about affirming localized cultures. And that's what we've been doing over the past 7 years, is trying to work out what are the roots of agroecology in our own history, going back to the ancients, by the way, the hunters and gatherers, who largely, by the way, had a plant-based diet. Meat wasn't something they ate every day, which is very interesting when you look at that past. At the same time, you had cattle herders, etc. But there's something to learn about how they related to the commons, which is very, very different from the societies that came after in the South African context. More than that, I mean, what's important for us in terms of food sovereignty is breaking with this fast food culture and to really find what is an appropriate food culture for us. And there are important ethical questions, and there are vegans also involved in our process, in our dialogue, who hold this position around plant-based diets, etc. But I think we've got to be very, very careful. I think that culturally, we've got to understand that there's got to be more debate, there's got to be more reflection around how we think through food choices and food culture and how we build this alternative food culture. It cannot come across as a Eurocentric approach to food, as a culturally asensitive approach to food. And so, for example, at Wits University, and this is the other aspect of your question, we have a food sovereignty center at Wits. It comes out of my own teaching, and students set up a garden a few years ago, and now we have a center. And we have a communal kitchen in that center. And we've invited some of the top African chefs in South Africa to come there and to cook food, mainly with the hungry students. There are about 5,000 food insecure students at Wits University. And what these chefs have been bringing into the kitchen is just amazing. I mean, they've taken some of the food aid that has come to Wits, and they've really transformed it in terms of local recipes, local tradition and culture, and have produced some amazing cuisine, and not all of it meat-based. And so I think there's room for us to think about this question in context and to experiment with it and find a way forward. I mean, the small-scale agricultural farming that we champion in the People's Food Sovereignty Act, in the food sovereignty space, is really about a kind of farming that is ecocentric, that it works with ecosystems on the production side. It works with the interconnections of nature. Agroecology is essentially all about that. It's about not destroying, which is what industrial farming does in an ecocidal way, but it's really about preserving and coexisting in an interconnected way. So that's where we're coming from on this question.
Sure. Thanks, Vish, for a very profound and wide-reaching answer. Loazi has a question for you, Dorah. Thank you, Dorah, for a lovely talk. On the back of some complaints that the DDM is a centralizing power, do you see the DDM being an enabler or an inhibitor for local municipalities by adding yet another layer of governance?
So from where I'm sitting right now, the DDM really, I don't think it's an inhibitor. I think it's an enabler, because I have seen how different departments, even within a municipality, would plan on their own, and they would have, there's this silo approach to planning and implementation and budgeting, all of that. And I think when you think about working with the three spheres of government to be able to plan together, then that becomes even complex. The intergovernmental relations legislation really was meant to make sure that different spheres of government are able to work together. But unfortunately, it hasn't been able to realize that. And as a result, through this district development model, where there is really a desire for the three spheres of government to come together, to plan together, and to be able to execute together, could be able could really assist. It could really go a long way. And I was just listening just today to someone from the Eastern Cape municipality talking about the desire to be able to go into any place and find a building. You know, she was even giving an example, it could be 6 stories, but where you walk in and you are able to find the home affairs, you are able to find the water people, you are able to find the electricity people, instead of taking a taxi from this place to that place and to that place, even things like that. And I think it is an enabler when I look at it, because it means that you will have a one plan, a district one plan that pulls together all of the various aspects into one, and it will force the various departments to start thinking together, where you know, to avoid this situation where you are emerging with a infrastructure plan for education that doesn't take into consideration any of the climate change issues. You know, now there's this IPCC report that has been spoken about in every media platform. But what does that entail for an official that works in a housing department? What does it mean for them? And unfortunately, when people may look at this, but when they go to their real jobs, they just focus on the job at hand. And the pressures of service delivery also make it very difficult for people to think outside of the box. And I think this way of planning is really trying to force government to actually do what it's supposed to be doing anyway. So I don't think it's a burden. I think it's something that, because we are able to sit in the municipal sustainability portfolio, SALGA, be able to receive these plans before they get approved and look at them from a climate responsive point of view, to say, no, it doesn't look like this district has factored A, B, C, D, and as a result, we don't think this can proceed. We need to be able to see this and this and this plan, and it goes to the other department, they review this. And then when it goes to the budgeting, then we are seeing budgets that are responding to this one plan that incorporates all the 3 spheres of government.
Thanks, Dorah. Another question for Vish. Perhaps, let me see if I can phrase this, because it's really from Richard Worthington. I think there are 2 parts to his question, and I'll start with the first part. So if you look at some of the energy transitions, people are saying you can't just switch off coal overnight. You'd need some other options coming into the system before you can actually phase out. So the question asking that Richard has asked, are they not, so in other words, are there multiple ways to get us there, or is it really, because we've only got 10 years, we've really got to be much, much more radical? And so Richard's question, and I hope I'm not conflating issues here for you, Richard, multiple models are really important. We won't be able to finance and build all the renewable energies we should through any one ownership model. It's also important not to focus too much only on electricity generation for social ownership. It's imperative the transmission infrastructure and the system operator is publicly owned. So Vish, I wondered if you could come in. I think it is kind of going to your corporate idea, but maybe, I hope, Richard, I haven't distorted your question, and then you had a second question for Dorah, but I'll first open that one up to Vish. Thanks, Vish.
No, I mean, Richard is talking to the Eskom challenge directly, and well, Eskom has been a serious challenge in the post-apartheid period, as we all know. I mean, it's facing a multifaceted crisis. Systemic corruption, as the Zondo Commission and other revelations have come to the fore to affirm. It's facing the denuding of planning capacity in the post-apartheid period. It's facing this mentality of mega development, the whole thing about modernization. So build Medupi and Kusile, the largest coal-fired power stations in the world, and so on. Part of a productivist imaginary, if you like, amongst our rulers. And at the same time, it's at the heart of our energy system. We all know that it produces about 80% of our electricity and is responsible for about 45% of our emissions, etc. So it has a monopoly. I mean, the big challenge is the transition challenge. And the South African government, in my view, has been in reactive mode. It's been in crisis management mode, even regarding Eskom and even regarding the climate question. So even the embedded generation concession that has come to the fore now, it's come to the fore in the context of a dysfunctional Eskom. Okay, so you're not seeing a kind of policy agenda that is shaping where renewable energy goes in South Africa from the state, in my view. I mean, there's a lot of pressure coming from below, from local governments, et cetera. Now, of course, in this context, De Ruyter is very interesting in what he's saying about rethinking the future of Eskom. In the Business Day the other day, he was talking about marrying it to green industrialization. And so, I mean, I think there's some interesting things that he's talking about. We haven't heard this coming out of the kind of dysfunctional space of Eskom. So there's some visionary stuff here. So it's going to be interesting to see how this translates and impacts the restructuring of Eskom, the unbundling, a very controversial question. If it's not managed carefully, it could again reproduce, because the way renewables has been unfolding right now with the competitive bid window system and so on, it's entrenched the power of private corporations, even in renewables. So how the government manages the Eskom transition, integrally tied in with the renewable energy transition, is a tricky one, and they've got to get the balance right. They've got to incentivize, they've got to create maybe the backbone infrastructure that Richard is talking about around transmission. It's there, and manage that and position that in a way that ensures that we have an energy system, a renewable energy system that is effective, that is smart, that is integrated, that gives the state the kind of the edge to kind of take society in the direction we need it to go in. The whole host of things around tariff structures, etc., the smart use of that, the smart use of smart grids, blah, blah. We're not having that debate at a macro national level. And Eskom hasn't put out its deep, just transition plan that inspires confidence. So we have inertia, we have an institutional drag, we have a systemic problem there. But I think these conversations are important to clarify what we as the people, as the citizens want. Thanks.
And then the second part to that question that came from Richard, then he asked, perhaps Dorah could comment on SALGA perspective on community ownership in electricity system, including distribution, and or on the amount of outsourcing in electricity distribution, metering, billing, and if SALGA has a position or an aspiration in this regard. Dorah?
Well, the issues of electricity and energy don't fall within my portfolio, but I do work very closely with the colleagues within this portfolio. And what I can say is that, we feel like the playing field on the regulatory environment has been leveled. With the IRP 2019 making provision for that 500 megawatts annually from 2023 to 2030 for cogeneration. Furthermore, the amended electricity regulations on the new generation capacity that were published in 2020, allowing municipalities as an organ of state to apply to the minister to procure or buy new generation capacity in accordance with the IRP. Thus, municipalities, we feel they are well positioned to drive a sustainable local energy transition through decentralized energy generation and distribution. So SALGA has put together a program that goes around to capacitate municipalities on these issues. Many of them still don't understand what all of these developments mean for them, and how they can, be able to take, to size the opportunities that come with this. So, let alone the thinking around getting communities to produce and to own distribution infrastructure and things like that. So there is aspiration. From a SALGA point of view, there is a strong desire to get municipalities, because we believe that there are opportunities. We believe that there are opportunities for municipalities to really go this route. And for us, as SALGA, it's important that we capacitate them, we assist them to translate all of these opportunities for them, and provide them with some new knowledge, provide them with information, and assist in identifying the case studies or the best practices where something like this has been done, and the benefits thereof that comes with something like this. So I mean, we had engagements with the metros, and I believe that there is a desire to be able to explore the innovation. However, one cannot turn a blind eye to the fact that electricity has been very much a revenue generation for municipalities, and we need to really talk about it. What does it mean when we go this route? What does it mean for the revenue streams of municipalities that is earned through electricity distribution? Thank you.
Thanks, Dorah. Then a question, I think I'm going to direct it to Vish, because you were talking about, knowledge enhancement, et cetera, and Kim Berman asks, how is climate change activism introduced to every primary and high school curricula, even in the divestment debates that we're having at the universities? One of the things is to actually put climate change front and center in all the courses. Do teachers have access to sufficient training to ensure this basic education? And where are best practice examples? And I know, Vish, you've got a whole cohort of stuff that you do, newsletters, information, etc. But maybe you could share some of those with us, and even perhaps the kind of pedagogy of what you try and do. Thanks.
So thank you for that, Kim. In 2017, Cambridge University, it's been convening a kind of Berlin summer school, and it's really about targeting school children. And I was invited to speak at one of those in 2017. And it was very, very revealing. It was held at a German school in Berlin. And the teachers and the children that were there were seized with this question about how do we get climate into curriculum. It was the Greta Thunberg moment, and what else should we do? And what was interesting in all the breakaways and in the conversations and so on, the children were saying, we want our schools to be climate leaders. And so, it comes down to how do you decarbonize, how do you ensure decarbonization in a school? How do you manage water resources in a school? How do you ensure zero waste in a school? And that becomes the learning process. And that was very striking. And then there was a presentation actually by somebody based in South Africa on what private schools are doing. And that was striking to me. I sat there wondering, okay, so the Michael houses and the fancy schools in Grahamstown, etc., they are already investing in renewable technologies. They are investing in water management systems, etc., largely becoming self-reliant. But in that context, of course, having these conversations about climate. But in the South African context, there are two very, very important developments that I think are relevant to this conversation. The first is the children's movement linked to the Children's Resources Center in Cape Town. And we worked very, very closely with them for a very, very long time. And they have a network, and they work largely in poor working class communities. And they've been doing various things in schools. They've been encouraging schools to accept their mandate, for example, to set up food gardens. And in that context, they are making the connections from agroecology garden to the larger question. There's an example of a teacher, Magda Campbell, who's an activist in the South African Food Sovereignty Campaign. She works in Beacon Hill Primary, which is a school for the physically challenged Downs children in Mitchell's Plain. And she set up her garden as a learning tool and resource. And in that context, got the children to play with soil, etc. And eventually that garden became a beacon garden in that community. It also became a resource to educate all houses around that area in the neighborhood. And they knocked that on to have other schools reproducing this. So that's a powerful example for me of real practice in situ in schools in South Africa, led by children and in some cases teachers. Another very important example for this conversation is the generation of child and youth activists that have emerged over the past 3 years in South Africa. And here I think about Raisa Nur Mohammed at Parktown Girls, who stood outside her school every Friday. I think about, I forget her name now, Christine, sorry, Capidopoulos. She's now at University of Pretoria. I mean, there's so many of these young people who basically opened up these debates in their schools. They're now champions of the Climate Justice Charter at all their universities as we speak, by the way. I was in communication with them today. And they shaped that charter. And they took the charter to their schools. And they basically, Raisa addressed her school assembly on October 16th. And she made the case for Parktown girls to adopt the Climate Justice Charter as a learning tool and to use it as a basis to transform the school and to ensure that it's brought into curriculum. And of course, climate science. Many of these younger people are very passionate about the case, the arguments, the insights of climate science. And they've been saying it to their schools as well over the past 3 years. And the science is there. Our colleague Francois is in this conversation, I think tonight. Colleen is here from GCI. These are the connections that we have to make. But these arguments have been made about where schools should go and what should be done. Thank you.
Thanks, Vish. And then linked to that about the youth, there's a question from Raishan Ramil. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. Thank you for your talk, Dorah. I also have a question relating to expertise shortage. We often hear talk about empowering the youth, just as Vish was talking about, but generally they mean skills development for unskilled youth. Meanwhile, many well-qualified young experts who have graduated with advanced degrees are being underutilized and generally ignored. Shouldn't younger technical expertise be given more space to formally participate with decision-making and project development? I think I'll throw it first to Vish, just because it kind of links on to what he was previously saying, and then I'll open it to you, Dorah, as well. Thanks, Vish.
So there's this point about technical expertise.
Yeah, and yeah, not only for unskilled, but skilled.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really facing a challenge. I mean, Dorah's at the coalface. But I think we must think about knowledge in a very different way around this challenge that we are facing. So the Charter is an embodiment of different forms of knowledge. It's an embodiment of scientific earth science. It's an embodiment of technical knowledge around systems, which derives from ecology. It's also an embodiment of tacit knowledge. And this is knowledge that comes from people in everyday life and living, and where they are trying to figure out problems and they are trying to find solutions. And that's the beauty about the Charter, in my view, is that it's shaped by all these different forms of knowledge. Now, this also relates to the local government challenge, to the state challenge. The Charter calls for a climate justice state, a people-driven climate justice state. And the reason this formulation is there in the Charter is because we cannot surrender this problem to the state. We cannot assume that a highly educated, highly literate, highly technically trained bureaucracy by itself is going to solve this problem. I think that that's wrong. That won't happen. Climate is complex, and it's registering in complex ways. It's going to impact our society in very complex ways. We're already seeing that. I mean, a drought ramifies through everything, the economy, your institutions, etc. A cyclone does the same thing. So we really got to think in terms of a new vision and conception of the state, which is what we are calling for. And we are calling for a state that can be deeply democratic, because we've got to make sure that the kind of collective thinking, the power of all these forms of knowledge comes to the fore in the deep just transition. So in other words, society owns the climate problem, and society must be enabled by the state to own and lead on this problem. If elites believe that they are going to just solve this problem by themselves, I would argue major upheavals in societies, because systems are going to crash. We're going to be living in a state of permanent catastrophism. Systems are going to crash, and you're going to have to rebuild these systems. And a bureaucracy is not going to be able to do it by itself. And so hence my argument that we need a different vision and conception of the state. We need a different underpinning of knowledge, and we need to bring the people in. And that's how I would answer this question.
Thanks, Vish. And linked to that, Dorah, Nadia Shah says, thank you for the opportunity to join this important discussion. it seems that much of the discussion on just transition is taking place at a national government level, much to what Vish was just talking about. What support does local government require to meaningfully join the national discussion on just transition? And I think this is the critical point, to localize the conversation. Are there any good examples of social dialogues taking place at a local level? So I'll hand it first to Dorah, and then I think Vish has got a couple of examples he's already given us, but he might want to add in some more. So Satgar, supporting, spinning up some local discussions at the local level. Dorah?
Yeah, no, definitely we are, but I think like some of the other issues I've mentioned, the issue of the just transition, the conversation is being had at the national, is not being had at the local level. And this is one of the things that I always talk about. And we've seen, we have been approached by a number of organizations to partner on just transition projects. And when you look at where they would like to work, it's important to actually notice that they, organizations, they choose where they would like to go. But I think we need to have the fundamentals first, right? The basics first, which is we need to have a local government just transition strategy. What do we mean when we talk about just transition in a local government context? Right? What does it mean? When we go to Steve Tshwete in Mpumalanga and we are going to be implementing a just transition project, what does it mean for them? Right? So we have got pilot projects right now that are being implemented here and there, and Satgar is in partnership with that. But I'm more interested, and I had a conversation with someone last week and said, what I'm interested in out of all of these project pilots is to first develop a local government strategy on just transition. And be very clear and develop it in partnership with all stakeholders. Internalize what does that mean? What does it mean for jobs? What does it mean for the revenue that the municipality has been earning? What does it mean for local small businesses that have been operating in that area? So for so many aspects, there is no clear strategy. And if there's no clear strategy, there's not going to be any clear plan of implementation as a result, and with a budget, so that we know that there is a vision that we have developed that we will rally around. And I think, what I'm interested in is really not to partner to be able to implement piecemeal projects in the absence of a clear strategy that has been developed with all the stakeholders. And yeah, so I think if you ask me what does local government need, we need that. We need to start with that. In the same way that we've done with the renewable energy, we developed a strategy, it was developed, climate change was developed, and there was a clear plan of action in terms of these are the issues, and this is how we are going to be able to address them.
So there's a comment of support from Richard Worthington to say we need to nominate Dorah Marema to the Presidential Climate Commission. I don't recall anyone from local government or presenting this perspective in the PCC now getting underway or developing a framework for the just transition. And Chippy was talking about that this morning and saying that not necessarily that, but on the just transition. So yes, we will definitely be putting your name forward, Dorah. There is a question. I just want to, we're coming to the end of time, but I'm trying to capture everyone's question here. There is a question from, I hope I can pronounce your name correctly, Hlengwe Radebi. Thank you, Mama Dorah. With your experience having worked with civil society and now with government, what advice do you have for civil society to have their voices heard by government? You heard that Vish, and I'm going to ask him that question later on before we close. Are government listening? Because it seems they're not responding. Vish has been putting stuff through and no response. What is the most effective way to have civil society included in the room when cities and other government bodies formulate climate action plans and other climate change policies? Dorah, and then I'll hand it to Vish as well. Dorah.
I saw this question in the beginning and I was just marveling because I actually made a joke to my fellow civil society that I should start running master classes on how to. So I think, for having been in civil society for many years and having tried to get like Vish, knock on doors and get them open and get stuff taken up. I think it's important to, I think there's a two-way, right? There's a way where there's the way we continue to lobby and really stay independent and make sure that that lobbying and advocacy role is there. But on the other hand, we need to actually look at partnering with government, partnering with local government, partnering with national government and provincial government to be able to bring in all the innovation. I think civil society has got brilliant opportunity. I mean, when I took up this job, I actually, I was asking myself, why am I doing this? Because I'm in there. But at the same time, I thought, well, all these brilliant ideas that we have in civil society, there may be an opportunity to now finally bring them into the mainstream. Rather than implementing a greenhouse project in Joburg Park, just in the city of Joburg, how about this gets replicated in all over South Africa? And I think that is the perspective that we need to have, to look at who are the people that we are trying to lobby and where are they sitting? Because I always say that if we keep on making statements and declarations and all of these, and they're not finding themselves in the desk of someone, and as a result being taken up into being programmatized, being part of the APP, then it becomes a challenge, right? It becomes a challenge because it will continuously become, and ever since I've moved to Salga, there has been a number of partners and organizations that have been coming to sit down and to present their ideas and their thoughts. And I don't think it should be at that level alone. It should be also at the level of the local municipalities that struggle with issues of capacity and resources, as I mentioned in the beginning. They are not able to get the resources. Why not partner with them and don't develop the project beforehand? Go and sit down and speak to them and really be clear about what are the these are the challenges, because you are also part of the community, right? And the citizenry. And these are the challenges, establish a common ground and then define in this financial year, this is what we would like to do. And we'd like to partner with you to be able to deliver on this. And in there, then you've got a partner. And you are able to go independently to be able to raise the resources, but with the backing and the support of a local municipality of your area. And you are able to come back and implement, and gradually these focal areas will find themselves in their APP, where they have no choice, but actually to be able to get support and to be budgeted for.
Thanks, Dorah. And then one last one for Dorah, and then I'm going to, I think, start closing because we've got about 8 minutes. And ask each of you a final question. Dorah, the question was, do you think ward councillors are doing enough?
Look, I don't think one can sit and say local councillors are doing enough, or even they're not doing enough. I think there are pockets of success. There are pockets where local ward councillors have really done well, have partnered with their constituencies to be able to effect change, to contribute issues into the IDP, and to see that the issues are really taken up and there's constant engagement and constant feedback, right? In the same breath where you have got the situation where there's just no cooperation. So I don't think one can sit and say it's really failed. And I think we would have to evaluate. We'd have to go and conduct research, and say this is what works and this is what doesn't work. And can we be able to review this local ward councillor system in some way? Because I think it's all really in the hands of the residents, of the people that are being served by these municipalities, to raise their voices, to stand up and to be able to say, this hasn't worked, and this we believe, and including the institutions of Harlem and the researchers, everything. You can be able to be able to commission a piece of research that proves that out of whatever number of municipalities in this country, this local ward councillor system hasn't worked. And then really profile that and make it prominent so that it can be considered.
Super. Thanks, Dorah. And then before I ask the final question to both of you, Vish, I just wanted to ask, you spoke about that the UN process didn't really have the right people in the room in some of the negotiations, and also in the research coming through in the IPCC. You've delivered to Parliament, you've tried to raise these things. What do you think is the root of the problem there? I mean, obviously it's multifaceted, but why is it that one doesn't get traction?
So Colleen, as I've been explaining, I mean, I think the multilateral process, in short, has been hijacked by particular interests. And this is not conspiracy. I mean, this is political economy, and it's how powerful interests have shaped, over 3 decades of multilateral negotiations. And so, now Joe Biden suddenly stepping up, where one faction of the American ruling class recognizes that this is a serious problem. The climate science has woken them up, and they realize that, the denialism of Trump is climate madness. They recognize the shocks in the United States, the flooding, the wildfires, etc., is very, very real. And so suddenly, on Earth Day, he convenes a summit showing the most seriousness that we've ever seen from any American president around this question. And that is beginning to build a momentum and to change the geopolitics suddenly of climate. So we cannot underestimate the power of these powerful forces, this global power structure, etc. This is, even from what we've heard, pushing China a bit more. I mean, some of the recalibration around transition plans, nationally determined commitments, etc., etc. So suddenly you have a big player shifting the entire momentum, etc. And in that context, of course, South Africa is lagging behind. I think the South African political elite have felt that, and this is where even the Climate Commission has got it wrong, that they can just make an argument, even for South Africa, to get international finance and resourcing and support for its just transition. We've got a state that has used coal for over 100 years. Its carbon intensity per capita is higher than China, than other BRICS partners. This is a carbon criminal state, no matter how you cut into the science and how you look at it. This government has to wake up and to get to the act, basically. This is where we are, basically. Okay.
Super. So just before I hand it back to David, I want to say thank you very much. The enthusiasm of both speakers is incredible. It's definitely a passion that drives both of our speakers. But I want to ask one quick last question. In an ideal world, and if all your dreams could come true, what is the one thing you'd want out of COP26? Dorah.
So for me, it's definitely, really cracking the issues of the means of implementation, that making sure that there's available access to technology, there's available, climate finance, and actually also, paying attention to the issues of, of adaptation, because I think that, yes, we talk a lot about mitigation, but what about adaptation? We have seen now recently, even in Europe, the floods. And I think many developing countries are really suffering because of climate change. And we need to really scale up. We do have the adaptation fund, but I've always argued that if we do not have the direct access means, in all of these funds, they will always remain a pie in the sky. Yeah. Thank you.
So many are saying the financial issues are going to be critical. Vish, your dream?
Well, rapid decarbonization. And ambitious, and to the point where we're not even talking about 50% cuts by 2030, but we see an ambition that's coming out of this with resourcing, with support, etc., for maybe 80% cuts by 2030. That would be my dream.
Radical. Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. I hand back to David. Thank you both, Vish, and thank you, Dorah. Fantastic. David, I think, will you conclude or? Yeah.
Either way, Colleen, but thank you very much to both our speakers. I've just put a message in the chat that you can indicate your appreciation through either a message or through jazz hands function in the reactions box. I think this was a rich discussion which covered multiple areas, the role of local government, civil society, and really, I think, helping us grapple with those kind of questions. So thank you to both our speakers for enriching us in that sense, and look forward to our next seminar, which is on labor and the just transition, which was mentioned, and that will be in 2 weeks' time. So just to remind you, 2 weeks' time at the same time, please join. I'll put the RSVP in the chat, and we look forward to your attendance. And with that, good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning from wherever you're coming, and cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good one, thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.